It's lights out on the pit wall. Welcome to our Fantasy Formula One podcast. I'm your host, Jeanmark, and joining me this evening is my bro, Dominick, and my father, Dr. David Kessler. We are your knights in racing armor, and thank you for joining us. It's a huge surprise. Last week, this time of the recording, we had 106 subscribers. Right now, we're at the cusp of 200, 199. So thank you to everyone who's been joining the pit crew. For us here on the pit wall, it has been amazing to see all the comments, all the support, all the likes, and especially the Reddit community. Most of my inspiration for videos and people I connect with has been on the r/fantasy F1 Reddit. So thank you to that huge community. You are doing an amazing job. Keep up the great work. Let's kick it on over to our Spanish Grand Prix Fantasy Formula One race results. The Spanish Grand Prix is notorious for not allowing people to pass. Many of these positions stay the same by the end of the race. One of the big standouts is the sad situation for Tsunoda. He qualified 16th and his engine just stopped. He got negative 14 points as a result of that. He had a hot first race. He went up in value by a lot. And now he's just been tumbling, losing 0.9 million over the last 2 weeks. Alonso was another big loser, losing 7 positions, and that got him negative 5 points. This is the first time we've had someone who did not DNF who ended up with negative points. And bro, this, I believe, lost you the King's race in our league DRD.
It definitely did not lose me the King race. I had an abysmal showing either way, but the negative points absolutely did not help. It was a bad situation, and that was just the cherry on the top of the bad cake.
Yikes. Well, that's why in League DRD we have a floor and ceiling, because I hate getting negative points. That's the worst. So we bottom them out at 0, but we also cap them at 30 so you don't get overpowered drivers. Someone who got great Hall of Fantasy points is Ricciardo and Perez, both getting 23 points. Ricciardo gained 1 position. Perez gained 3. Those 2 drivers, it's really tricky because their teammates are clearly getting a lot of points. So these 2 guys have gotten under the radar. But Ricciardo, this last week, the very first time that his sentiment has actually been above 0. He's been losing so much value since the beginning of the season. He actually lost 1.1 million since the season started, and he might start clawing that back. But that's why I'm trying to get him on my team so that I can get the upswing of his rebound.
I picked up Ricciardo this last week, mostly just to finish off the 100 mil, because I was thinking about Norris, but then it would have been under 100 mil, and, you know, there's always the advantage of going over. So I went with him. Then at the end of the race, I was like, wow, he actually got me more fantasy points as well. I'm a little excited about that. We'll see if he's a good pick in the long run, but that was definitely encouraging.
And since we're speaking of the big drops, let's look over at our dynamic pricing. Despite his performance in getting 23 points, we have Perez, who dropped by 0.2 million since last week, and Ricciardo, who also dropped 0.2 million since last week, and then Tsunoda losing 0.4 million. The big upswing, though, is Ocon, raising by 500,000 since last week, and he's poised to continue raising. That's a total of 0.9 million in the last 2 races. The last 2 weeks, he has soared. What's your thoughts about having Ocon or some of these sidekick drivers who are able to give you an upswing of value?
So I also have Ocon on my fantasy team. He didn't get quite as many fantasy points during the race that I was hoping for. The value is going up, and that might end up being useful in the long run.
Unfortunately for me, I switched out Gasly for Ocon, and Ocon didn't do as well as Gasly this week anyways.
And didn't you do that the week before? You had Ocon, then you switched the Gasly, and then Ocon outperformed him. It seems like you're doing switcheroos and getting it wrong.
Yeah, isn't that tough how it happens that way?
I mean, it's tough for you. I'm not doing that. I don't care.
True. Just for everyone watching, the streaks. Orange is your qualifying streak. Blue is your race streak. But if you ever see a red bar, that means that they lost their streak this last race. So Vettel lost his streak. Alonso lost his streak. Gasly was doing really good. It's sad because he lost his qualifying streak. And then Alpine, because everybody was excited about the Portugal Grand Prix, but they didn't do as well this race. To have a constructor maintain its streak, it has to have both drivers in the top 10. Red Bull hit their 3 race streak, and so they got their extra 5 bonus points for qualifying. And looking into this next race for the Monaco Grand Prix, wow, there's going to be a lot of people that are eligible for a 15-point bonus streak. Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc. Ricciardo can get 10 bonus points, Norris 15, and Ocon, he's going to be a race behind. But it's looking like Monaco is going to be the crazy haul of points this part of the season.
Especially when you consider that we were just talking about how Catalunya is a track where almost no passing happens. Well, this is literally the track where no passing happens. So if any of those guys, Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, they get into a good position at the beginning of the race, those fantasy points are almost guaranteed.
I had not thought about that. That's true. Barring any crashes, they're pretty much guaranteed. If they get that quality streak, they're going to get the race streak.
So that's just something to think about. We've heard that there are certain people who've been playing their cards right throughout the season that have got enough money that they can actually afford at least a couple of these drivers, maybe all of them if they've played it really right. If you are capable of affording a couple of these drivers on your team and you join our league right now, we will go ahead and reserve a podium spot for you. We'll brush it off, make sure that it's got your name on it, because you're going to do pretty well, assuming nothing bad happens.
Yes, that's pretty much going to be overpowered, whoever gets these lineup.
Actually, I think there's several teams that I've already seen that have at least 3 of those on it already. So unless you get all 5, I don't think it guarantees you a podium.
Since we're speaking of balancing out your team, let's kick it over to the Google Sheet. I have made a new tab called Price Point, and I take people's suggestions. For example, Slivo from YouTube, here's his price point. He wanted to compare the difference between having Red Bull and Mick Schumacher versus having McLaren and Ricciardo. As you can see, in both of these situations, you're getting a ton of streak bonuses. If you go with Ricciardo, you can get 10 points for getting the race streak. If you get Red Bull, you can get 10 points for having the race streak as well. So it's kind of a toss-up between Ricciardo and Red Bull in which one you'll take. Having the Red Bull Mick Schumacher, though, gives you marginal gains. You can see all the highlighted yellow of that advantage. Now, this is based off of 102.6 cost cap, which is what I have on my team. But what we have on price point number 2, which was suggested by a Reddit user, time to start is now. This guy, he has 103.5 million in his budget, and there he is, having Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, and potentially Hamilton all on the same team. But in order to do that, he would have to have Mick Schumacher and Haas. It is such a toss-up between these. But if you think about it, if Hamilton's going to guarantee you 15 more bonus points, that's probably going to outscore Sainz. Now, it is close because Red Bull can get their bonus 10. Monaco is going to be the nice stir pot for people getting bonuses, but are these teams going to be good beyond Monaco?
As long as you have a team that you only have to substitute out up to 3 people, you can maintain it.
So no, the problem is that you have these good drivers, but then on the bottom half, maybe not so great drivers. So yeah, you're getting the bonus streaks for this week, but you're not going to be getting those streaks every week. You might reconsider your composition so that you can have a more balanced team.
Have those good drivers, you usually have to have a very poor constructor.
Exactly. For example, Alpine scored -1 points this last race. That is crazy when a constructor goes in the negatives. It's practically unheard of. If you have one of these weaker constructors, you got to be careful because in Monaco, there isn't a lot of passing. So if you had Haas or you had Williams, that might sound good and all, but if any of your drivers give you problems, that's only going to hurt your overall line.
Well, I mean, if you have Haas, I don't think passing is going to be something you need to worry about.
True. Blue flags, maybe, but not passing. Good point.
Definitely not passing.
Well, speaking about Haas and everything that's going crazy, it is now time to get our race reactions. Starting off, Verstappen had perhaps the best possible start he could have. Only 3 times in Spanish Grand Prix history has someone outside of pole won the race. Verstappen was able to make his first move because he was second on the grid. Dad, how did you feel about that whole first corner bravery by Verstappen, but also the wisdom of Hamilton to not make contact?
Well, it was fun to watch, to see how aggressive he was. Thought he's got it. Now the pole, it's hard to pass, but you have to hand it to Hamilton saying it's not worth it at this point. If I play my cards right, I'll pass him in the future, and sure enough, he did. I was happy for both of them because it made it more exciting to watch.
Exactly. That's the crazy thing. Hamilton usually stays within 2 seconds of the driver in front. In seasons past, when Hamilton would get out front, he would be able to build such a huge gap that he could pit practically, not have anybody take his position on the track. It's really amazing to watch, and Hamilton decided wisely this is not where he needs to have a wreck, because in Imola, they went into the first corner and he chipped off a part of his wing. Here, if he had damage, that would have suffered him the whole race because there wasn't a wet track where he would have been driving slower. Then we have Mazepin.
Oh, man.
Okay, it sounds like...
You can't even say Mazepin without laughing.
Bro,
it's so sad.
Tell us your reaction. It seems like Mazepin is, for whatever reason, being in the news every single race.
Look, I don't know what it is about this guy. It seems like I go on YouTube and I see these compilations of Mazepin, why'd you do this? Mazepin, why is he doing that? Mazepin, get off the freaking road so we could do something. In this race, once again, we have the Mazepin issue. He's back marker. Hamilton's trying to pass him. He's trying to catch back up with Verstappen. For whatever reason, Mazepin was just not giving him his passing opportunity. And Toto Wolff, he's talking to Stewarts and like, what is going on here, man? Why isn't he pulled out of the way yet? It's just crazy to me. It seems like he can't go a single session without somebody being angry at him. Hamilton was finally able to get around him. He stayed within bounds, and that's just how racing goes. When you have an idea of what you want to go down, Hamilton should have been able to pass like right away.
I think it happened later too with Bottas, didn't it?
Yeah, you're right. So he got past Mazepin finally, and it was not even a little bit longer than it was Bottas's turn. Now, he's not a back marker. He's actually racing for the points.
Here's the thing. With Mazepin, he actually got a penalty before the race began because he held up Norris during qualifying. And if you go back over the footage, it was really hard. Everybody was really jumbled there. He qualified last place and got a 3-grid penalty. Okay,
no.
So you're back at last again. But in the race, you are shown 4 blue flags. He can choose when to allow the car behind him to pass, as long as you don't get to that 5th blue flag. So Toto Wolff being upset, that's just Toto Wolff being upset. If Mazepin hadn't gone to the 5th flag, I don't care what Toto Wolff says. He's within his right to drive his race. And yes, you may not allow him to pass whenever, but we've noticed Mazepin does not like getting passed. Imagine him in an actual faster car. He would be like the memes of Grosjean. He'll torpedo you before he lets you pass, right? Like that's what Mazepin's going to do. Bottas, on the other hand, he doesn't have blue flags. So the only person who's forcing him to pull over is the team. Man, I feel bad for Bottas because Mercedes keeps him on these 1-year contracts. He's never had anything longer than a 1-year contract. So if he does not do exactly what the team says, he's out of there. He's never going to be able to get a break because they're going to tell him, nope, you're going to let him pass. Nope, you're going to let him pass. I just feel bad for Bottas because they're holding him on a leash. You feel like he can't actually run the race that he wants to without being pushed over.
He's kind of having to lean back, but this year with the rumors that Russell might come up and join and take his place, I think he wants to show other constructors what he can do. And so I don't blame him for making Hamilton pass him like a regular driver.
I think it's funny though, when you're watching the race, even the announcers weren't 100% sure what to expect. It's been years where we've been talking about Bottas. Feel like you don't get the kind of appreciation. Good drivers get long contracts, right? That's generally how that works. And Bottas is a good driver. It almost seems a little bit like insulting. He's had to deal with this 1-year contract every year, and every year could be his last one, and he knows that.
Something we have to keep in mind is currently you can get paid whatever. After the cost cap of drivers are having $30 million for the drivers. This is separate from the team expenditures.
Both of them together is 30 million, or
Yes.
each guy gets 30 million?
No, together.
Oh,
which
man.
means anybody who gets paid more than 15 million is the number 1 driver.
Right.
And everyone's going to know it. Here you could say, well, he's getting paid more than the so-and-so, but this person, but like when you have to share it, the only way for me to get paid more is if you get paid less. So I was thinking about that. I was like, okay, so if I was a team boss, what I would probably do is say, you're both getting paid $10 million. And then the extra $10 million are bonuses based off of performance so that both drivers feel that you are potentially going to be the number 1 driver. So if you outperform the other driver, you can earn up to 10 million more. Instead of paying a guy 20 million and then, of course, feeling awkward when the guy underneath of him is beating him. So I don't know how they're going to do that. But the reason why they put Hamilton on a 1-year contract is because they don't want to be paying him such a high thing. Currently, it's going to be grandfathered in, which is why he wants to get a contract negotiation extension before the summer. I feel sorry for Bottas because Bottas is doing pretty much anything the team asks him to do. Fans aren't happy with that because he can't be on Verstappen and Hamilton's level. And now, of course, the big talking point from the last race is tire strategy. Races are boring if it's a one-stop race. This track is notorious for not allowing passing, but because it wasn't clear on whether everyone would do a one-stop or two-stop, it actually made it more interesting than normal. And here, the reason why it became interesting is because Tsunoda's car broke down. down. His car caused a safety car right at the edge of which people would be making a commitment to two-stop strategy. So Red Bull decided to stretch out their tires a little bit longer because they didn't have to push them because of the safety car. And then Hamilton and Mercedes decided, because it looks like they're pushing longer, we'll try to pit, do two stops, and we'll catch them. Of course, everybody's talking about Hungary 2019 where a similar thing happened. And so you feel bad for Red Bull because if Perez was close enough, they wouldn't have been able to do that. Bottas and Hamilton pretty much got free second pit stops because there was such a big gap. But if Perez was in there, he could have slowed them down or he could have forced them on an alternative strategy. And then you feel sorry for Verstappen. There was no late safety car, because if there was a late safety car, then that would have saved Verstappen because he could have had a shorter pit stop. Then he would have had fresher tires. But instead, Hamilton came and caught him. But what are your thoughts, Dad, seeing Hamilton not only pass Mazepin, pass Bottas, but pass Verstappen?
I think they had a good strategy. I was just curious as to why, if the Red Bull was going to try one stop, why they didn't put hards on Verstappen instead of mediums and then try to stretch those out to the end of the race.
With the thought is, hey, we're going to go all the way to the end of the race. Maybe it would have been better for them to have the tires that would last a little bit longer. But it seems like even the announcers at the beginning of the race were like, hards are not usually considered a good tire compound for this track. The amount of time you're losing is not making up for the fact that you have the longer life. They didn't actually expect the two-stop strategy from Mercedes. They thought that that was a possibility. Maybe there might have been a different thought process, but I really think what was happening is they were hoping for a second safety car or virtual safety car or something, and then they would switch out tires. I think they decided that just in general, that would have been better in the long run than running the hards.
Here's the tricky situation, though. If there was a safety car, you would have lost the huge lead that he had, but he would have been able to pit. On the flip side, he only had 2 laps to make a decision to pit, or Hamilton would have undercut him. Of course, hindsight's always 2020, but Red Bull probably should have just pit him immediately.
Oh, absolutely.
To try to cover it off because his tires started falling off. The only tracks that I'm familiar with that hards are really good on are your low downforce tracks, because you need the extra grip around corners, and hards just don't help that way. So Monza, Spa, it was 2 years ago that Leclerc put on hards and held off Hamilton at Monza. Like, he made those hards stretch so long, but that track doesn't have as much downforce needed. So he was able to make those hards stretch. But here on this track, those hards aren't going to give you as much grip as you would need to stay competitive in your speeds.
Honestly, just really feel bad for Verstappen. The entire time, you know, he's probably thinking about Hungary 2019. Basically the same thing happened, but this was going to be the time. They're going to be different. You could hear it at the end of the race, bro. You could just hear the frustration that this race was his to lose and he lost it. That's just unfortunate.
Well, so that's the crazy thing. Verstappen, this is the best start of a season that he's ever had. But this is also the best start of a season that Hamilton's had.
He always is just getting better. Like, oh, Verstappen, you're doing better. Well, I better do better so that I can stay ahead of you. Hamilton is just, I love this guy so much.
Here's the crazy thing. Arguably, half of the races this season, it was Verstappen's to lose. And so that is frustrating when you think that you can win in some mistake, some strategy change, and you lose it. Red Bull usually starts off slow to a season. So arguably in the second half, when you get to more Red Bull favored tracks, it just looks like Mercedes has fixed its car problems from testing. If Hamilton builds up a strong enough lead, it doesn't matter how good Red Bull gets. They're just going to not be able to catch up. It's nice to have actually fighting in the front. We really haven't had that in a while.
This was by far the most interesting race, I think, of the season, just because the anticipation, and that was palpable, man. It was great. And then he passed, and then I was like, okay. But man, just for that moment, we didn't know what was going to happen, and that was real exciting.
On to our heroes and zeros. Bro, who is your hero?
My hero of the week is going to be Leclerc. He started in 4th. He ended in 4th. That's not necessarily the most exciting thing. I'm going to be honest. I was a little bummed when he got past Bottas. He didn't stay in front of Bottas. But, you know, that's how that happens. They had very different tire strategies, and Bottas' strategy just worked more. But I will say that from a fantasy point perspective, I turboed this guy. Okay, he got me buco points. Real great stuff. For the whole race, he didn't do nothing crazy. He didn't do nothing wild. He kept his head down. He raced real real good.
If Ferrari still had the engine that they had in 2019, it would be a three-way fight right now in the championship. Leclerc is just that good of a driver that he could hang with Verstappen and Hamilton. He's quietly averaging fourth position every single race. He's not quite on the podium, but Ferrari's happy for constructors' points that they're going to be able to continually fight McLaren off. And Dad, surprise, surprise, you've talked about him twice already. Who's your hero?
Oh, my hero has to be Hamilton. The maturity showed when he didn't make contact when Verstappen went around, and taking his time and working with his team to have the right tire strategy so he's able to pass him later on. I was just impressed.
Blows my mind. Analytics was saying that Hamilton was going to catch up with Verstappen in the last lap. And Hamilton must not have heard that, because he was like, oh, you mean like 7 laps before the end of the race? Okay. It was crazy. So hats off to Hamilton. What was your hero of the week, bro?
I'm going to cheat a little bit, because as of today, it was going to be Ricciardo. He did a good job holding back the Red Bull of Perez. He did a really good drive. He got 23 points, same as Perez. But I was listening, shout out to Tomo. He's on YouTube. He has really great content. And he commented, and I hadn't noticed this before. I had tweeted out at the beginning of the race, interesting that Raikkonen was on an alternate tire strategy. Everyone else had a different tire than he did. Raikkonen was the only one to make a one-stop strategy work. And he gained 5 positions because of it and got 15 points fantasy-wise. So I'm going to make Raikkonen my hero, because Tomo pointed out everybody else who did a one-stop suffered. So the fact that Raikkonen could make it on a one-stop tire strategy, even though we never really heard about him during the race, he was very quiet, but that was a very solid drive from a fantasy perspective, that he could pass 5 people because he was able to manage his tires for so long.
Raikkonen made up for last week.
Yeah, definitely. Going from losing a lot of points to gaining some points. Actually, that probably makes him a net 1 point between losing all the points from last race, DNFing, to this race, getting 15. He did make it on the ORC Elite. Shout out to our section when we get there. As for zeros, what do you think, bro?
There wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on that would be super obvious for a zero, at least to me. So I'm going to go with the easy one. Verstappen's pit strategy was just unfortunate. Verstappen-Hamilton battle was the thing that was keeping the race most interesting.
And then for you, Dad, who is your zero?
Well, it happened to be my hero from last week. Alonso did really well last week and not so well this week. He's my zero.
Consistency is what you need in fantasy Formula One. Yeah, you can have a hot driver, but if he's going to DNF the next week, then you lose all those points you just gained, which ties into my zero. Alpine, like I said earlier, it is rare for a constructor to get single-digit points, and in this case got -1 point. That is because between Alonso and Ocon, they lost 11 places. Constructors don't get driver bonuses. That's purely off of qualifying position and then positions gained or lost during the race. So for them to lose 11 positions means they lost any points they would have gained during qualifying. So that's rough for Alpine. And so that's something you got to keep in mind, is how are those two drivers working in tandem? And so I have to have Alpine as my zero. As we segue from our race reactions into the ORC Challenge, there's some bit of news that has come out that I find quite intriguing. The first is that not only has Mercedes been losing some personnel through retirement, changing positions and all that, but they have been getting engineers poached or hired away. So what are your guys' thoughts about Red Bull hiring more engineers to work on the new engine project and taking them directly from their competitor Mercedes?
Knowledge is power. And I understand that the engine is considerably different. There are things that you learn working with an engine about what works and what doesn't work. Mercedes engine has worked. And so if you have the people who know what makes that work, then it's going to look probably better for you in the long run.
And then on to our second story. Zach Brown, the leader of the McLaren F1 team, came out and made a comment about the voting system and how it works in Formula One. Dad, what's your whole perspective on how the voting works and what Zach Brown wants to change about it?
Well, I think he's wanting to actually use something that's already approved more often, which is secret ballots. They have different teams, and when they were talking about what the salary cap would be, some of the teams that were lesser, that were around the proposed salary cap that they were going to vote on, were actually voting for higher caps, which didn't kind of make sense to him, because if you're already at your salary cap, I think his point is if we do a secret ballot, then each team could actually do what's in their best interest, not the team that they feed into.
The only way for this sport to continue continue, I believe, is for them to follow the suit of like the NFL and these other American leagues where you have rules that are being approved every single season. As up to this year, you had to have unanimous team vote for some of these big changes. That's never going to happen. To have this ability for more changes to happen, but allowing the teams to be able to actually express their feelings, and secret ballot could help facilitate some of those changes, especially when you think about how much money they're having to put into it.
If with the secret ballot, it gives them a little bit more power because they're like, we're teams too. We want to succeed as well. And if we're always having to do just whatever the bigger team says, we're never going to be able to improve ourselves. But what you also have to think about is that this gives advantages to certain teams. If I have more teams underneath of me, then that's more votes going my way. You get certain teams that don't have any lower teams beneath them. They just better hope that the other teams agree with their position because they don't get those little extra votes from the other teams. Silent ballot could definitely be an equalizer in pretty much every front possible.
Moving on to our race challenges, but before we do that, I want to give a cool shout out to one of the comments in our videos. Chasing Humor said, so happy I came across your channel, trying to go from a 100-point deficit from my position and go to first place in my fantasy league. I wish him the best of luck on behalf of the Pitwall. I see Dad smiling. Dad, how do you feel about the deficits and trying to catch up?
When I was going to join our league after the first week and I missed the qualifying, so I was going to start 140 points down. That was the last place team. I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do it. Later, I relented. I thought, hey, let me support our race, and if I can make it up to about 25%, I'll be happy. And if I start last and not last at the end of the season, great. I think that watching the podcast and following the trends and looking at the Google Sheets will help you optimize your success, and I wish you luck to get as high as you can this year.
We've been doing the fantasy Formula One for a couple years now, so we can say from experience that we know how difficult it can be to make up ground once you're behind. Hopefully, get the winning combination and you'll be able to claw yourself back into the winning ways of your league, and from the pit wall, we will be rooting for you. If you want to just let us know how that's going, we'd like to keep track of that.
True. Comment on this video. Let us know your guys' strategy, how things are going on. And that is our news bit, our thank you to all of you who post comments. But now it's time for our one race challenge for the Spain Grand Prix. We want to give a special shout out to the top score, and we want to clarify things for our podium. If you score on the top 3 for that race, the one race challenge, you will get a special podium ceremony at the end of this video. But one of the stipulations is that we do not include Mega Driver points. That way it's not whoever decides to do Mega Driver this week gets to be number 1. But we want to give a really good shout out to Pie in the Sky, because despite losing negative 14 points with Sonoda, he was able to use his Mega Driver for Verstappen and score 199 points. So shout out to you. Now, what we're going to be using moving forward, the top step or the middle position, even if everyone ties for first place, the middle position who gets the national anthem during our podium ceremony will be based off of 2 criteria. The first is highest points, and of course, Mega Driver will detract the Mega Driver triple points from that. But the second is lowest team value. So Edwin has a lower team value, which means that he was able to score more points with less. That means that if you're able to hang with the best, you could potentially break the tie by having a lower value team. Right here, we have our Pitwall Monaco Grand Prix. Thank you to everyone who's been joining our one race challenges. I know you have to rejoin every single time. The link will be in the description below. If we get at least 10 entrants minimum, I can update our cover photo and our icon with custom graphics. So thank you to everyone who's been a part of that and continues to be a part of it. This now brings us to our ORC Elite. The ORC Elite is the best lineup. I use a computer software to crunch the numbers in my Google spreadsheet. The 2 criteria is 100 million or less and no Mega Driver. What is the best possible team that you could have score-wise with those 2 criteria? And the ORC Elite for this race was 189 points, just 1 point ahead of our top podium finishers, but costing 91.4 million. Isn't that insane? That huge gap that you could have remaining in your budget. But we had Verstappen, 41 points. Leclerc would have turboed, getting you 56. Raikkonen, good old Raikkonen, would have got 15 points with his one-stop strategy. And then the Williams, Latifi with 8 points, Russell with 10, and then having Red Bull, which is more expensive than McLaren. And so it's interesting that this is the first race in which the lower tier drivers were able to have enough points to allow Red Bull over McLaren. What are your guys' reaction to our ORC Elite?
The two Williams, man. Never thought I'd see that.
So that means there's always hope for you. Don't have the most expensive team? That's fine. You can still do really good. And the ORC Elite is for you to compare your team. Were you able to hang with the ORC? Well, our top 3 podium finishes sure got close. And there you have it. Thank you for joining us. This has been an amazing Pitwall podcast. I would have to agree with Bro and Dad that this is such a cool thing to look forward to every week, and being able to share it with all of you, trying to make improvements to not only the Google Sheets, but also what we're doing on this podcast so that it is great for you to watch, but also great for you to learn. So thank you again, Bro, for joining us. And thank you, Dad. And again, I'm your host, Jeanmark. This has been the Pitwall. We've been your knights in racing armor. You can like and subscribe to join the pit crew. And until next time, we'll see you on the Pitwall.